Sometimes places aren't what they seem. We are at a cemetery at Blandford Church. And in Petersburg, Virginia, if you pass by this place, you probably wouldn't know anything significant happened out here. There's a brick wall around it, a big beautiful church here. It's historic. You see it right there in the background. No, this video is not sponsored by Red Bull. I just need me a pick-me-up. But it's a big, beautiful churchyard here with all of these cemetery plots plotted out across this field. Today, we're out here to tell you what happened here in July of 1864. Because this is one of the spots where the focal point for the Battle of the Crater took place. Stretched out across this field here, there were Confederate soldiers, Union soldiers, fighting for dear life. And that fight would culminate in one of the most tragic situations in the American Civil War, with men being butchered at the bottom of a pit, and some of them trying to surrender and not being allowed to. So here we are out here early morning. We're having to walk over to the crater from the cemetery. Although it's not a bad walk, it's a little bit inconvenient. But apparently a storm came through the area and washed out the roads to the crater, to the rest of the battlefield really. So the visitor center decided, the national park decided, that they were going to shut all of the road down to travel. So they're no longer allowing you to drive down that road to any point on the battlefield. You're having to take a tour bus down, which is about an hour and a half worth of a tour, where they drive you all the way down to the crater and back and give you a 30-minute tour of the crater. Well, you all know that on my videos, it takes a little bit longer than 30 minutes to put this stuff together. So, scouted out the area. Blandford Church was the best place to park. And then I'm going to walk over from there, like I'm doing right now, and trek up that road on foot and go down to where the crater is. And we're going to talk about the fight over there. After Cold Harbor, General Grant had kind of learned his lesson on the frontal assault thing. It was a complete and total failure. And he knew that if Robert E. Lee had any kind of an advantage, it would be those trenches that they had built around these cities that they've been protecting for over 3 years. He did not want to conduct another frontal assault against Robert E. Lee while he was entrenched on any kind of ground, even though he was attacking him here in Petersburg. So he was reluctant to approve a frontal assault on a strong area of the trenches. Well, the Pennsylvanians of the Ninth Corps had come to leadership to let them know that they should be doing the thing that they knew how to do best. They were miners, coal miners and such. They knew how to build a good mine. And their plan was simply to dig a 500-foot long tunnel and then spread it out on the end, left and right side. Once they get it opened up, they're going to pack it full of 8,000 pounds of gunpowder, run a long fuse outside of that tunnel, light that thing off, and then when it finally hits, it's going to go sky high and it's going to blow that entire area where the South Carolinians are located to the sky and kill hundreds, if not thousands. That's their plan. And with that plan, the leadership decides that if that's going to happen, the maneuver is to punch in the United States colored troops as the lead element. They're going to run through, they're going to spread out left and right side, or north and south, to create that gap in the middle, and then the rest of the troops are going to come flooding through that gap and make their way all the way to Petersburg and back. They're going to run the gambit, and essentially they're going to hit the flanks and start taking out Confederate troops and hopefully push them out of these trenches and on the run, or make them surrender. That was the plan. In a minute, we're about to walk over here to the crater, and I'll give you some really good views of what that crater looks like, and we'll kind of talk through how it was built, the shaft and the air vents and all that good stuff, and I'll show you the locations of that too. And there was a counter mine that was dug by the Confederates out here, so it's a pretty neat perspective. And the fact that there's nobody out here right now because the tour road's closed is going to be even easier to tell this story. So the coal miners they're soldiers now. They've been soldiers for a while, and they don't have the tools that they had as coal miners. They have pickaxes that are fashioned from other types of axes. They have cracker boxes to be used for the wood that they need. and they're improvising as much as possible out here. When the idea is brought to Grant, he's reluctant, and the reason why is the frontal assault. But the plan itself is kind of a ingenious plan. He thinks that it's one of the best plans to be able to clear the Confederates out, which is why he decides to go ahead and approve the plan. So it commences right around July, I want to say July 17th is when the digging starts. During the 2 weeks leading up to the main assault, the fight itself, Burnside has selected the USCT to be the lead element. Now those troops, for the last couple of, really since their existence, those troops have been kind of misused. They're not being used as soldiers, they're being used as laborers. The United States military that has allowed them to become soldiers and freed them from their previous position of being enslaved are now using them to dig trenches, cook food, deal with baggage and wagons and horses. Essentially, they're putting them back in the positions that they were in when they were enslaved in both the North and the South states. And let's not get things twisted. This American Civil War at this time in 1864, the Emancipation Proclamation did not free all enslaved people. It was an act of war meant to be aggressive towards the states in the South that were in the rebellion. So the enslaved people in those states were proclaimed free by that emancipation. And the primary purpose of that was to cripple the economy of the southern states that were in rebellion, and to ensure that the states in the North, who at this point had put millions of people in the service of the military, could also put those enslaved people in the service of the military as soldiers and use them for whatever purpose. So this USCT that's going to be put in the lead element here, that's what's happened to them. They've been used for the purpose of labor. And Burnside knows that maybe they're not tested, but they are, however, perfect for the job because they're not tired, they're not beat down by war. It'd be great to get them in there. And he's going to train them. And so for 2 weeks, he has trained those troops on how to fight, where to fight, and what exactly to do. And the plan's looking pretty good. General Meade, on the other hand, he has other plans. The saddest affair I have ever witnessed in this war. That was General Grant talking about this location here, the Battle of the Crater. And indeed it was the saddest affair. If you really dig deep on this battle and you look at not only the communication, the movements of the troops, the fighting that took place here, it is the saddest affair. The conduct of some of these soldiers out here was pretty terrible too. Even Northern soldiers killing their own fellow soldiers to try to get some sort of leniency from the Southern soldiers. It's pretty amazing. And then of course the Southern soldiers that were coming up to this trench, they had every everything in mind to come up here and butcher as many African American soldiers as they could because they were angry about the situation that they were in. It's pretty amazing. So we've arrived at our destination, the tunnel. And if you take a look right here, there's the entrance to our tunnel. Now this is roughly where the tunnel was, and the entrance to the tunnel is what they're assuming. And there's a deep shaft that's burrowed out here, and you can see all the way up towards the crater. You might not be able to see it in this video, but there's ripples in the land here. And the reason for the ripples is when they packed all these sandbags around this gunpowder and lit off the fuse, that gunpowder went off. And at the top of this hill, it blew the entrenchments, all these soldiers, hundreds of feet in the air, just flung them everywhere. Some of them just body parts, just blasted to pieces. As a result, this entire shaft starts to crumble because of the blowback. So they have this big blowback of gunpowder and dirt just come rushing out of this shaft, and the ground just starts to sink and fall into the position it is. Now over the years it's sunk even further, and the ground has finally claimed all of the shaft all the way up to where the crater is. On the other side, there's other divots in the ground, and when you go over there and take a look, they're pretty similar to the divots here. That is the counter mine that the Confederates dug because they could hear the work going on over here, and there was a rumor going around from some soldiers that they had taken prisoner that a mine was being dug. So they decided to dig a counter mine and try to run into that mine, or possibly even blow up their own mine. But the Union soldiers got to it first, and when it was time to light that fuse, something terribly wrong happens, and it slows down and confuses everything. So who's in charge out here? Well, at the beginning of the operation, it's going to be Edward Ferrero. His men are going to be the U.S. color troops that we're talking about, pushing into the crater once it explodes, and then opening up that gap that we talked about north and south. And they were the 30th, the 13th, the 23rd, the 29th, the 39th, the 27th, and the 31st USCT. Now notice that these troops don't have a state attached to their name. They are just simply USCT. That's how they were identified during the American Civil War, as the U.S. colored troops, not by state. So that is the makeup of the men that are supposed to fight here under Edward Ferrero. So the mine's all dug, the plan's all set. Burnside's ready to go. The USAT has been training, they're ready to go. Then General George Meade lets his prejudice and his ideas get the best of him. He decides that if he puts these troops in that are untested, that are also African American troops, that it's going to make it seem like General George Meade decided to send these newly freed, former enslaved people to their doom in a crater that he thought possibly was not going to work. He already had his reservations about this whole fight, and General Meade really didn't want to make it happen. The leadership at the top wasn't supportive of it. So, the day prior to the fight, General Meade decides he's going to change the plan. He leaves it up to the leadership to determine who's going to be in the lead element, and he says it has to be the white troops. So, the leadership can't decide. What happens? Well, some accounts say straws were given out, and Ledlie drew the short straw. Burnside wanted Ledlie in the lead. Burnside is also rumored to have put names in a hat, shook the names up, and pulled out Ledlie's name. Ledlie, described by other soldiers, was a drunken coward. Probably not the best man to lead something this important. Now going back to the mine and the shaft, there's a sign here that talks about the ventilation. And if you look here on the ground, there's a big hole in the ground there. That's one of the ventilation shafts going through the mine tunnel all the way to the end. When you get so far into a mine, the miners know that you're going to start losing oxygen because you can't see in there. So you have to use fuel to light up your path in those days. There's no electricity. They're lighting up the path and eating up the oxygen along the way. It's becoming stagnant in there and they cannot breathe, and it's getting extremely hot too. So what they do is they dig this shaft that goes down into the ventilation shaft down into the mine itself, and they light a fire underneath it, and it circulates air. So it pushes up old stuff and it allows new stuff to come in from the other portion of the shaft. So you're essentially getting fresh air in there. As nasty as it smells, these men were in there every single day, sweating, getting dirty, stinking, and breathing stagnant air the entire time to build this mine. It must have been something, I don't know, maybe they were used to it. Me personally, I don't think I could do it. So now General Meade, reassembling the plan, decides that the 18th Corps and the 5th Corps are going to have to support this fight and come up and attack alongside the troops that have been positioned to take the lead. Henry Hunt, from the artillery, assembles 110 cannons and a bunch of mortars, and he places them in strategic positions to fire into this area once the crater goes off, because they don't only want just the shock of everything to happen, but they also want to kill as many people along that line as they can and prevent them from reforming. So that's also part of the plan. So it seems like they got everything figured out, and it could have worked. That last minute change might have ruined everything. So the plan's in place, the change has been made, even though Burnside doesn't want it to happen. And 315 down there at the bottom of that hill right behind me, the fuse is lit. General Grant has been communicating with his officers all morning, wanting to know what's happening. He wants to get an update on everything as soon as they possibly can update him. So General Grant writes back at about 4 o'clock in the morning and asks what's happening. He gets no response. He rides out to the line. He asks them, what in the heck is going on out here? Why hasn't the crater gone up or the explosion happened? And they're not sure. So Pleasance wants to send men back in the mine, but he's afraid that maybe it's just a stalled fuse. So they take a little time. Then they finally send men back in and they find out that the fuse has actually sputtered out. So they reset the fuse, they light the fuse. And then at about anywhere between 4:15 and 4:40 in the morning is when this thing finally goes off over here. And that calamitous explosion that takes place is something that many, many, many men would talk about for years to come. And this whole area that we're walking into right now, the crater used to be a lot larger than this, a lot deeper than this. But we'll show you what's left of it today. So from way back here in that valley, Ledley's men step off for the fight. This crater's gone up into hell. The cannons and the mortars are going off over in this direction. Well, Ledley's men step off. Ledley is not with his men. As they step off, we have Pennsylvanians, New Yorkers, Marylanders, and Massachusetts men coming across this field, going into this fight. They go right smack dab into the depression that's right here in front of me. And imagine, if you will, there's no grass, there's no trees, there are only lines and lines of Confederate earthworks, and soldiers are buried deep into some of this dirt, and the divots are so deep down in here that there's no coming out of it. You're slipping and sliding. If you've ever tried on a pair of brogans before and tried to climb up a hill, you know exactly how difficult it is to just walk on a wet surface. Imagine walking on wet mud in those brogans and trying to get out of this thing onto the other side once you've climbed in it, with soldiers now shooting at you from the top. That's what these guys were facing when they came up here. So now Ledley's men are caught in here, and the support's coming up. You got Griffin's brigade coming up next, and he has New Hampshire, Maryland, Maine, and Vermont. Then Hartranft's men are also coming up right after that. And instead of moving out in the opposite directions of each other and trying to do a frontal assault, everybody's starting to try to pile into the same location because they think that they're going to push in and pass this and then move to the left or the right. But they can't, because they are stuck inside that crater, and there's no support on the left or the right for these soldiers as they're coming up. They're all just naturally piling into the same place. So let's talk about leadership and where they were at this time. This was probably one of the worst breakdowns of leadership in Union history out here on this field. You have Wilcox, who is 70 yards behind. You have James Ledley, who was in a bomb-proof. You have Burnside, who was now near artillery and nowhere near his original headquarters. Meade wasn't even close to the field, so there was no relying on him for anything. And then Burnside, who had moved, is now in a position where when the reports are coming in, they're coming back to his original headquarters site, and Meade has now moved up to that position because he's worried about what's going on. So when he gets there, he's receiving reports before Burnside is receiving reports. And that's pissing the general off. So let's talk a little bit about the Confederates that are out here. The South Carolinians are out here in this area where the explosion happens, and roughly 352 men are actually killed when that mine goes off. They're killed right here in this location. The mine was a success. The shaft underneath these earthworks did do what it was intended to do. It killed a lot of people. It blew a hole wide open. The planning on the Union side was piss poor. That's why it failed. The communication was also terrible. Another reason why it failed. The Confederates, on the other hand, had an idea that this was happening. They dug a counter mine. They dug another counter mine. They weren't able to hit the other mine because they were too high. The other mine was way too low. It was deep in the ground. So they decided that they were going to position mortars with timed fuses to go off and fire on their position, because they knew something was about to happen. So they set those things with the intentions of firing if something did happen. And it did. And when these soldiers come pouring into this crater back here, the Confederates let off those mortars and rained hell down upon those Union soldiers that were in there. Now the USCT hasn't pushed up yet. They're still back in reserve. They're at the tail end of all of this. And the plan for them is to try to get them in. Again, they have been trained for 2 weeks. Go through the center, push to the left, push to the right, open up the gap. A lot of these soldiers probably still have this in their head as what they're supposed to do. And they're untested, and they're not very well trained. They are coming into this fight without any experience other than digging and working. So they get up here, and the USCT is finally deployed. And what do? Even with officers out front, directing them, go this way, go around this crater. They do not listen to those officers, and they all pour right into the same mine with all these other soldiers here. So at one point in time, this crater has thousands of Union soldiers stuffed down inside. Thousands. It's absolute calamity. It is insane. So Bushrod Johnson is absent from the field. He's been absent from the field for a long time. When his men are out here in the field, he spends most of his time in his headquarters. A.P. Hill, on the other hand, is, for all of his flaws, one of those soldiers that, regardless of how he feels or how sick he is, he will slap his uniform on and run out to that field and try to stop the problem. He will try to assess the situation and fight like heck to fix it. And that's what Lee likes about him. He knows he's a tenacious leader. A.P. Hill gets his clothes on as quickly as he can, and he rides out to this field. And we're talking early in the morning here when this stuff goes off. Or 4 o'clock, almost 5 o'clock, it takes off. And then he gets out to this field, and he realizes he's got a big situation on his hands. But the Confederates that are out here are actually holding the line. They're on the left side and the right side, and they are shooting down in towards this area. And they're lined up across the road line over here, facing this direction, and trying to prevent the Union soldiers from pouring out of this area and going. At one point in time, Michigan tries to create a line facing this direction and moving forward, but then they're shoved right back down into the crater. Then some troops are ordered to go forward from the crater and take an artillery position. Once they get out to the artillery position, they start getting slaughtered and are forced back into the crater again. Well, Lee then sends a messenger out here to count. He wants him to count the battle flags to see what the force is, because at this time they're stretched thin. He can't afford to send more troops into this position for fear of allowing a weakness to happen somewhere else, because part one of this plan was Deep Bottom. That was a fake attack to draw troops to that location to weaken this area so that they could light this fuse. And when he gets out here, they count 11 battle flags in place. So he realizes it's a force that's out here. It's not just a small unit creating havoc. They are coming in force. So he decides to call up Mahone and the Alabamians and to get them in place. So Virginia's out here, Georgia's out here, and Alabama's about to be in the fight too. So as the USCT comes into the position out here, and they're going into that crater that's directly in front of me, they have Fort Pillow in their mind. Now, Fort Pillow, for those of you that don't know, is the location where Confederate soldiers actually killed United States colored troops who were surrendering. They butchered a whole bunch of them. So they're angry and they want to get back at them for that. They come running into this pit yelling at the top of their lungs, "No quarter," and remember Fort Pillow. Every Confederate soldier that's along this line out here, including the officers, can hear them yelling this. So obviously this drives fear into the men that are out here, but it also spreads rumors like wildfire. And the information is being passed back that the USCT is attacking, and they're yelling "No quarter," and they're yelling "Remember Fort Pillow." The common enlisted man that's marching up with Virginia, Alabama, and Georgia know about this. How do we know? Well, I'm going to put a quote up on the screen from one of those soldiers that said that he had heard about this before going into the fight. Now, when they were coming into this fight, it's just like any other day in 1864. It's another fight. It's another situation where somebody's going to have to die, and they hope it's not themselves. But when they come up here and they realize that formerly enslaved people, formerly enslaved by them, are going into these pits, trampling all over people that they know and that they care about, and then yelling "No quarter" and talking about Fort Pillow. Well, some of those soldiers, they take to the idea, well, if you're not going to give us quarter, we're not going to give you quarter. And they have vengeance in their heart, and they want to come up here and kill as many USCT troops as they can, because, quite simply, they hate them. They have a hatred for those people. That's why they've oppressed them and kept them enslaved so long. And not everybody in that group of soldiers coming up here has done any of that. But there are some of those soldiers that wrote about the hatred that they had in their hearts, wanting to come up here and fight like heck, and double checking their rifles to make sure it was loaded properly so that they could kill as many people as they could. So now Turner's men come up and they enter the fight. This is about 9 o'clock in the morning when the last of the Union soldiers that are going to pour into this fight are here in this fight. There's no more support coming. And off in this direction, some Union soldiers have pushed up to this way. Back off in this direction, more Union soldiers are coming and pushing into this way. And the majority of them are pouring into the area that I'm at right now. And they're advancing right about where that rock is over there. They're not really getting too much further than that. So Virginia and Georgia comes up to the fight. Mahone's lined his men up and they're pushing up in this direction. And at first they're doing a frontal assault, but then all of a sudden it turns to hand-to-hand combat. These men are bashing each other's skulls in, stabbing each other with bayonets, gouging each other's eyeballs out. They're doing anything they can to prevent the flood of Union soldiers from pouring out of that crater across this field and into their area. And it is very effective what's happening out here. At one point in time, Mahone's men go from moving straight forward into the area to sliding off to the side, peering over into the crater, and shooting down into the crater the men that are in here. Union soldiers that are inside this crater are seeing that these soldiers that have just come up are being extremely vicious to the black soldiers that are inside. And as the black soldiers are trying to run away and get out of this crater just like the white soldiers were, they decide to try to stab, shoot, or kill those soldiers that are coming out of the trenches because they want to have quarter. They want these Confederates to not kill them. So they're killing these black soldiers as they're leaving. All across this field behind me here, Union soldiers are pouring out and they're retreating back in this direction. 10 a.m., after seeing everything that he's seen, General Grant wires in that the assault is a complete and total failure. He's given up on this fight at 10 a.m. This fight does not end here until about 1 o'clock in the afternoon on that day. Because, like we said, Alabama's pushing up. Those Confederate soldiers are pouring into this field, and even though the Union leadership has given up, that's crossed this field here, not having to deal with the guns and the bayonets that are in their faces, these guys still have to fight. They're fighting for their lives now. Three hours have elapsed since Virginia and Georgia came up, and Alabama goes into the fight. And the fight is every bit as rough as they say it was. And if you read about the fighting that goes on out here, and the hand-to-hand combat and the butchering of the soldiers that are happening out here, then you know for sure it's a problem. That these things that they write about, they're not fake at all. Eventually, Union soldiers pour out of this crater and go back across this field. Union leadership has given up on the fight. It's getting close to about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and now about 1,000 soldiers are left inside this trench trying to fend for themselves with hundreds of people piled on top of each other.
I never felt more like fighting in my life. Our comrades had been slaughtered in the most inhumane and brutal manner, and black slaves were trampling over their mangled and bleeding forms.
Now, the Confederates on the outside of that trench are looking down and they're firing in and killing them left and right. and then they offer up the ability to surrender. The Union soldiers take that and they say, yes, we'll surrender. Well, when the white soldiers come out of that trench, they are allowed to surrender to the Confederate soldiers. The USCT that are in that trench, or the crater, they're not given the same quarter. They are not taken prisoner. They are starting to be killed at wholesale, any of them that are left behind. Eventually, some of them do make it out of there and are taken captive instead of being killed. And then they're paraded down through the streets here in front of everybody so that everybody can see what happened to these troops at the big Battle of the Crater. Now, the Confederates capture about 2,000 small arms out here and 22 battle flags. And the result of this fight is an overwhelming Confederate victory. It is a shot in the arm for the fledgling Confederate forces that are still hanging on and trying to fight. And at this point during the American Civil War, Atlanta is still firmly in the Confederate control, and these soldiers out here are not ready to quit. Not even close. The siege has only just begun here in Petersburg. It would be many months to go before the forces are pushed out of these trenches and pushed onward towards Appomattox, where they would eventually surrender what was left of them. And one thing we didn't talk about was the contentious behavior between Meade and Burnside in this fight, which didn't help the situation out at all. And I'll put a couple quotes up on the screen here to show you exactly how these guys were behaving towards each other during this fight. There's absolutely no reason why this shouldn't have worked. It's a failure on their part. They got thousands of men hurt, captured, or killed out here at the Battle of the Crater. And for nothing. It created nothing more than a big propaganda wheel for the Confederate forces out here. It did not help the Union soldiers one bit at all, or their cause. So once again, we're to the point to where we ask what happened out here. We ask, what is the result of the Battle of the Crater? This is where I like to talk about the numbers, essentially. 14,600 soldiers are involved in this fight out here, combined, both north and south. And that's just in this area. That doesn't include anywhere else. All concentrated in the fight here. Out of those 14,600, 3,789 soldiers would become casualties. Now, what is a casualty? That's anyone that's wounded, missing, captured, or killed. A lot of people get that confused with death. You know, you say casualty. Gettysburg, for example, a lot of people go out there knowing that there's 51,000 casualties over 3 days, and they imagine 51,000 dead bodies laid out across that field. It's simply not true. For the Confederate side, 1,491. And that's an estimate for both sides, because there's no telling how many men who were out here in these lines that were unaccounted for were also killed, wounded, or missing, that were a part of this fight that they just don't know about, especially with the Confederate side. There were many men and young boys that were fighting for the Confederacy that just were not accounted for. And they will go down in history as being unaccounted for and being people that no one will ever know anything about. That's this field right here. All of this stretching out behind me. If that story about what took place out here at Petersburg National Military Park, this field that used to be a farmland, if that does not get your engines revving and make you want to come out here and check this out, then nothing will. This is significant history. These fields are beautiful, and it's always a good time to come out and check these places out. Support your parks, support American Battlefield Trust, save these lands for future generations, and tell these soldiers stories. Tell their stories. Don't let them die. So now we're going to push on over towards Cemetery Hill. Yes, another Cemetery Hill here in Petersburg, where some of the fighting also took place, and where it was kind of this was kind of a point of contention. One of the areas that needed to be controlled by both sides. We'll take you out there so you can see all the headstones that are out there and the beautiful cemetery, and kind of pan around a little bit. And then we're going to move over towards Lee's headquarters, so as you can see just how far away Lee was from this fight too. After this fight happens, Lee subsequently decides he's going to move his headquarters from where he's at, which is actually closer to the City Point area, and move it closer to the field out here with his forces, so that he can be a little bit more in control of what's happening. Now you see, getting closer to the end of the war, he's starting to feel more and more and more like he needs to be in control. He has to have his hands on everything. So that's one of the things that might have actually, I don't know, I mean, if you're an armchair general, it's one of the things that could have led to some of the failures, really, not being able to trust your own generals, your own officers, to lead their men in the fight. But when you have people like George Pickett, for example, far, far away from his men at a shad bake, while his men are getting trampled on, how can you trust some of them? Well, as promised, we decided to take you out here to Violet Bank, the plantation home where Lee's headquarters was during the time of the mine explosion over at the crater, the Battle of the Crater. This area here, not the house itself, but the surrounding area would have had about 5 or 6 large campaign tents. And all of Lee's staff was out here. And the morning of the explosion, remember this is at 4:44 in the morning roughly, this explosion happens and Lee pops to his feet and ends up out here looking around, wondering what's going on. And he sends that staffer forward, but then he also gets on his horse and he rides out closer to the action to see what's going on and to try to direct the attack that's happening out there, the counterattack. Eventually, he ends up moving his headquarters from here closer to, he goes to Chapin's Bluff first, I believe, and then he ends up closer to Petersburg, the Petersburg area, until April 2nd and 3rd of 1865, when the Confederate Army is finally getting pushed out and on the move to Appomattox. We'll close this video out by going over to that Confederate cemetery now, and we'll talk over there on the hill that Mahone now resides on. Today I decided I was going to go out to a portion of the battlefield for Petersburg that you don't normally get to see in videos when we talk about the Battle of the Crater. And it's the Cemetery Hill portion that's over by Blandford Church. Blandford Church is separated and off to itself, but there's a whole other entire section of this cemetery. It's kind of hard to get to. It's just on the other side of the fence line here where the national park is. Major fighting took place here, leading into that crater when the explosion happened. And as a matter of fact, William Mahone's men came and pushed up to one point. Man, I see some giant turkeys out there. William Mahone's men came up and pushed up to the crater, did hand-to-hand combat, and then kind of slid off into the side. There's deer. It's a hunter's paradise out here. But they slid off to the side over where I'm at right now and peered down into the portion where the crater was. And they were basically having a turkey shoot there at the crater. This area is not part of the national park. And there's a cemetery out here that kind of concerned me, because way off in the wood line over there, there is a section of graves that's underneath a bunch of trees that's covered by grass so high you can barely see the headstones. And when I went to look at those headstones, they were all World War I veterans, all of them, buried out there together in a tree line area with no veneration, no acknowledgement whatsoever, other than the headstones that somebody put on them a long time ago. It's a pretty amazing thing here at the Blandford Church. And I'm going to get down to the bottom of it. In Blandford Church Cemetery, there is a memorial section for the Confederate soldiers out here. William Mahone's tomb is up here on this hill. That plot back there is for South Carolina. And there's a sergeant that's buried there in that plot. There's also other soldiers buried in that area. We're going to go over here to William Mahone's tomb here in just a second. There's memorials for the units that were out here, up here on top of this hill. This cemetery hill, if you will. And this location was picked by William Mahone specifically. And it is overlooking the Battle of the Crater. If the trees were gone, and you looked in that direction from where William Mahone's tomb is, you would clearly see the outline of where the crater was. You would see that this is a great position right here for artillery going towards that crater and towards the Union soldiers that were trying to take that crater and this hill and this area where the Blandford Church was. We're at the top of that hill now, and we are at the tomb of Mahone. Right here. This fiery man, this scrawny, skinny little man, would go on to be a wealthy man after the Civil War, and he would run for public office. He would be hated by politicians on both sides of the aisle because instead of sticking to his guns and fighting against one party or another for the reasons prior to the American Civil War, he realized that these states that were no longer Confederate states, they had to fold back into the Union, and something had to happen in order for them to progress. Plus, he was a businessman. He had a lot more common sense than most people gave him credit for. I have some articles from the 1800s of when he was in office, where there's cartoons drawing him depicting northern politicians holding onto his legs and kissing his feet. It's kind of a funny cartoon that I picked up at one of these antique stores, but essentially people were angry that they were working with him on anything because of the fact that he was a general in the Confederate Army. And for a long time, men like him were not allowed to hold a public office in the South because of the war, because of what they did in the war. So this hill is a Confederate memorial, if you will, and it has a lot of statues all around. And then down at the base of the hill here, you see flags from the different states that were throughout the Confederacy, because there's soldiers that are buried out here from those states, and they're memorialized here for their actions in Petersburg. And down at the base of this hill is a flag from South Carolina, and there is a grave of a sergeant that fought out here and died in 1864. And we'll get his story, and we'll put that story up here on this channel. I guess when I walk these fields and these cemeteries, in some sort of odd way, I'm a bit like Chamberlain when it comes to this stuff. And I think in the mindset of a poet, because Chamberlain was kind of a poetic man, even though he studied rhetoric and he was eventually a politician and a really good general in the war. To me, it's poetic to be out here amongst all these graves and this cemetery plot over here. Because when you walk out to these fields, the Civil War battlefield, the battles play out in your head, and you're still seeing the lines and the people fighting. But when you come out here to this area, you can see that the battle is over. The war is over. The people that were fighting that war, killing each other for whatever reasons they were killing each other for, they're out here in these graves. That was generations ago. But today, people still try to fight that war. And I don't understand for the life of me why. They're not fighting it with their fists. They're not shooting at each other. They're using words. And they're trying to hurt each other as much as they can over this war that happened over 160 years ago. Well, those that fought it can't speak anymore. Not from the grave, only from the textbook. And it's up to us to teach each other about the fight that happened out here at the Battle of the Crater and other places, to tell the truth. I hope you've enjoyed our video out here. I've had a lot of fun walking around. If you want to get out to the crater right now, the road's shut down. The only way to get there is to hike the trails, or do like I did. Park over at Blandford Church, walk the probably half a mile or more to the location. And I suggest going early in the morning because it is hot out here. Even at 6 o'clock this morning, it was scorching. So I really appreciate everybody tuning in and following along on the adventures that we take out here on these fields. Until next time, this is History with Waffles.